Feel the heavy, metallic pulse of a story that beats with the rhythm of raw ambition and the search for truth. This is cinematic storytelling at its most intense, where every frame captures the heat of the human heart. Click subscribe now and feel the pulse of the story. The call came on a Tuesday morning, and I remember exactly where I was standing when I answered it. I was in the kitchen, pouring my second cup of coffee, watching the birds at the feeder my wife had hung outside the window 17 years ago. The feeder was red. She'd painted it herself. I remember thinking I should refill it before the weekend. My phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number, local area code. I almost didn't pick up. Is this Walter Harmon? The voice was a man's, steady but careful. The kind of careful that tells you someone is choosing their words before they say them. It is, I said. Mr. Harmon, my name is Daniel Reeves. I'm the branch manager at Eastfield Savings on Commerce Street. I apologize for calling you directly, and I want to be upfront. This is an unusual situation for me. I've been wrestling with whether to make this call for 3 days. I set my coffee mug down. I'm listening, I said. Sir, your wife came into our branch last Thursday and again on Monday. She was accompanied by a man I did not recognize. She was attempting to make changes to joint accounts. Specifically, she submitted paperwork to remove your name and restructure the primary holder designation. Our compliance officer flagged the second visit because some of the documentation she presented didn't match what we have on file for you. One of the signatures on the authorization form. He paused. Mr. Harmon, I've worked in banking for 22 years. I've seen this before. I felt you deserved to know. I stood very still in my kitchen. The birds kept eating at the feeder. How much is in those accounts? I asked. My voice came out even. I was surprised by that. Combined, just under $240,000, sir. I thanked him. I wrote down his name, his direct number, the branch address. I told him I would be in to see him personally, and I asked him to hold all changes pending my visit. He said he already had. When I hung up, I stood at the window for a long time. My wife's name is Carol. We had been married for 31 years. I want you to understand something about 31 years. It is not a number. It is a Tuesday morning in 1994 when she drove me to the emergency room at 2 in the morning because I thought I was having a heart attack and it turned out to be anxiety, and she sat in that waiting room without complaint, without making me feel small. It is her voice reading to our son when he was 4 years old, the same 3 books in rotation every night until the covers wore soft. It is arguments about money in the early years when we had very little, and the way we always found our way back to the same table, the same kitchen, the same bed. 31 years is a life that you build with someone, board by board, until you cannot see where you end and they begin. I did not cry that morning. I think I was too stunned to cry. What I did was sit down at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen, and I started writing down everything I knew. I am 63 years old. I spent 35 years as a civil engineer before I retired 4 years ago. I have spent my entire adult life solving problems methodically, systematically, without panic. When there is a problem, you do not react. You assess. You document. You build your case. I wrote down Daniel Reeves's name in the bank. I wrote down the date of the first visit and the second. I wrote down joint accounts, $240K, forged signature, unknown man. Then I sat back and looked at that last phrase for a very long time. Unknown man. My son's name is Garrett. He is 34 years old. He lives 11 minutes from our house, in the home he shares with his wife, my daughter-in-law, and their 2 children, my grandchildren, ages 6 and 8, who I see almost every Sunday for dinner. Garrett works in commercial real estate. He is a quiet man, thoughtful, steady. I have always been proud of him. I called him that morning, not to tell him what the banker had said. I called to ask a simple, casual question. Hey, Dad, he said. He sounded distracted. I could hear traffic in the background. Just checking in, I said. You and your wife doing all right? Haven't seen you both in a couple of weeks. There was a pause. Slight, the kind most people wouldn't notice. We're good, he said. Just busy. You know how it is. Sure, I said. How about your mother? You talked to her recently? Another pause. Not this week, he said. Why? No reason, I said, just asking. Tell the kids their grandfather says hello. I hung up and sat with the feeling that had settled into my chest. It wasn't anger yet. It was something quieter and colder than anger. It was recognition. I need to tell you something about my daughter-in-law, because she matters in this story more than you might expect at first. Her name is Denise. She is 32 years old. She grew up in a small town in Tennessee, the daughter of a school teacher and a mechanic. She married my son 6 years ago in a small ceremony in her parents' backyard, and from the beginning I thought she was one of the finest people I had ever met. Not polished. Not impressive in the way that makes you feel slightly less than. Just genuinely good. She remembered everyone's birthdays. She checked in on me after my knee surgery without being asked. When my wife and I went through a rough patch about 2 years ago, some tension over money, over my retirement adjustment, over small, accumulated grievances, it was Denise who pulled me aside one Sunday and said quietly, "She's struggling too, Walter. She just doesn't know how to say it." I thought about Denise a lot that Tuesday morning. I did not call her. Not yet. What I did that afternoon was drive to a law firm across town, not the attorney my wife and I had used for estate planning over the years, but a different one with no connection to us. I sat down with a woman named Patricia, a family law attorney with an office full of diplomas and a manner that was direct without being cold. I told her what the banker had told me. I told her about the signature. I did not tell her everything I was thinking, because I had not yet let myself fully think it. She leaned back in her chair when I finished and looked at me steadily. "You were right to come in before confronting anyone," she said. "The worst thing you can do right now is tip your hand. Do you have access to your financial records, tax returns, account statements, property documents?" "I do," I said. "I want you to pull everything you can access quietly from home. Don't move any money, don't close any accounts, don't change any passwords yet. We need a full picture before we make a single move. Can you do that?" "That's what I do," I said. "I'm an engineer. I build the structure before I pour the concrete." She looked at me for a moment and then nodded. "Then, let's build it." I drove home that evening and made dinner. Carol was home when I arrived. She was sitting in the living room with a glass of wine, watching television, and she smiled at me when I walked in a full, easy smile. The smile of a woman without anything particular on her mind. "How was your day?" she asked. "Quiet," I said. "Yours?" "Ran some errands," she said. "Nothing exciting." I went into the kitchen and made pasta. I called her when it was ready, and we sat together at the table we had sat at together for years. We talked about the weather. We talked about the grandchildren. She told me she was thinking about repainting the guest room. I listened to every word she said, and I watched her face, and I thought, I have loved this woman for 31 years. I have slept beside her and raised a child with her and built everything I have in this life alongside her. And she is lying to me right now, calmly, over pasta, and she has been lying to me for longer than I yet know. I did not let any of that show on my face. Over the following 2 weeks, I built my case. I am not a suspicious man by nature. I have never gone through my wife's phone. I have never tracked her whereabouts or questioned her explanations. 31 years of marriage had not required that of me, or so I had believed. I want to be clear that what I did during those 2 weeks was not done out of jealousy or possessiveness. It was done because a bank manager had shown me a forged signature on a financial document, and I needed to understand the full scope of what I was facing before I could respond to it. What I found was worse than what I had imagined. Patricia had recommended a forensic accountant, a quiet, thorough man named Earl who worked out of a small office near the university. I brought him every financial document I could access from our home files. Tax returns going back 8 years, mortgage statements, investment account summaries, the paperwork for the rental property we owned on the east side of town. Earl spent 5 days going through everything, and then called me back to his office. He laid it out calmly, the way people who deal with numbers do. Over approximately 26 months, a series of transfers had moved money in amounts small enough not to trigger automatic review. Individually, they looked like household expenses, contractor payments, routine transfers. Collectively, they added up to just over $87,000, moved out of our joint accounts and into an account I had no knowledge of, and whose ownership Earl had traced, with some difficulty, to a limited liability company registered in another state. I asked him whose name was on the LLC. He handed me a single sheet of paper. The registered agent was my son. I sat in Earl's office for a long time without speaking. He gave me the space to do it. He was a professional. He had probably sat with many people in that office after delivering news of this kind, and he had learned that there is nothing useful to say in the first minutes after a person's understanding of their own life is reorganized entirely. What I felt in those minutes was not anger. Anger came later. What I felt first was grief. Clean, heavy grief, the kind that settles into your bones. Grief for the father I had been, and the question of whether I had failed somewhere so deeply that I had lost not just my wife, but my son. Grief for Denise, who I was now almost certain knew nothing. Grief for those two children, 6 and 8 years old, eating cereal on Sunday mornings while their father helped their grandmother steal from their grandfather. Then I picked up the sheet of paper, folded it carefully, and put it in my briefcase. And I went back to building the case. I hired a private investigator. I want to be direct about this because some people have strong feelings about it, and I understand why. But I was 63 years old, facing the potential loss of everything my wife and I had built, and I needed documentation that would hold up. His name was Frank. He was former law enforcement, and he was methodical in a way I respected. Within 10 days, Frank had confirmed what I already suspected, but had not allowed myself to fully name. My wife and my son had been meeting regularly, not just the two of them, but with a third person, a man named Ray, who Frank identified as a real estate investor my son had introduced to Carol approximately 2.5 years earlier. The three of them had been meeting to discuss, and in some cases already execute, a series of property transactions designed to move our shared assets, including the rental property on the east side, out of my name and into structures I had no legal connection to. The relationship between Carol and Ray was not strictly professional. I received Frank's report on a Friday afternoon. I read it once, fully, and then I closed the folder and left it on my desk and went for a long walk through the neighborhood. It was autumn. The leaves were coming down. I have always loved autumn, the particular quality of the light, the smell of things finishing. I walked for almost 2 hours. When I came home, Carol was in the kitchen making dinner. I set the table. I poured us both water. I sat down when she called me. I had not yet decided exactly when I would act, but I had decided how. The following Tuesday, 3 weeks to the day after Daniel Reeves first called me, I met with Patricia and told her everything. I laid out the documentation. Earl's financial analysis, Frank's report, the bank records, the LLC paperwork, the property transaction filings. I set it all out on her conference table in order, the way I would have laid out the engineering drawings for a bridge. Patricia was quiet for a long time after she finished reading. "Walter," she said, "this is thorough. I needed to know the full structure before I could address any part of it," I said. "Your wife and your son have been systematically working to defraud you." She said it plainly, the way a professional says a hard thing. This is not just grounds for divorce. Depending on how the DA wants to pursue it, this could be criminal exposure for both of them. I had known this, intellectually. Hearing it said plainly in a law office was different. "What about Denise?" I asked. Patricia looked at me carefully. "You're worried about her." "She's the mother of my grandchildren," I said, "and I don't believe she knew. I need to know where she stands legally before anything else happens." Patricia nodded slowly. "That's going to depend on her cooperation. If she wasn't involved and she's willing to confirm that, it actually strengthens your case." I thought about Denise for a long moment, about her voice that Sunday afternoon 2 years ago. She's struggling too, Walter. She just doesn't know how to say it. "Let me talk to her first," I said, "before anything is filed." I called Denise that evening from my car, parked 2 streets from the house. When she answered, she sounded the way. She always sounded warm, a little tired, the sound of a young mother at the end of a long day. "Walter," she said, "is everything okay?" "I need to see you," I said. "Just you, not Garrett. Can you meet me tomorrow morning?" A long silence. "Walter, what's going on?" "I'll explain everything tomorrow," I said. "But Denise, you need to know that I'm not angry at you. Whatever you hear tomorrow, whatever you've seen or suspected, I need you to know that you and my grandchildren are going to be all right. I'm going to make sure of that." She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, very quietly, "I've been so scared, Walter. I didn't know what to do." We met the next morning at a coffee shop on the other side of town, the kind of place where no one knows you. She looked like she hadn't slept. She wrapped both hands around her mug, and she told me what she knew. She had known something was wrong for about a year. She had found transaction records on Garrett's laptop, not looking for them, stumbling across them when she was trying to print a school form for their daughter. She hadn't understood the full picture, but she'd understood enough to know something was being hidden. She had asked Garrett about it twice. Both times he had explained it away, an investment he hadn't told her about, nothing to worry about. She wouldn't understand the structure. She had believed him the first time. She had been afraid the second time. She had not known about Ray. When I told her about Ray and about her mother-in-law, she put her coffee down and looked out the window for a very long time. I watched her absorb it. I have seen people receive terrible news, and there is a particular quality to the face of someone who is processing not just the new information, but the retroactive reordering of everything they thought they knew. Denise had that look. "My kids," she said finally, her voice thick. "What does this mean for my kids?" "Nothing bad," I said. "I promise you that. But I need you to talk to an attorney of your own. Today, if possible. And I need you to be honest about what you knew and when." She nodded. "Denise," I said, "you are a good person. You married my son, and I am sorry that he turned out not to deserve you." She looked at me then, and her eyes were full of tears, and she nodded once more. "The papers were filed on a Thursday. I want to tell you about that day because of what it felt like, and because I think the feeling matters. I was not filled with triumph. I was not filled with the particular hot satisfaction that people sometimes imagine comes with a moment of justice. What I felt was something quieter, a kind of completion, the feeling of a long, difficult calculation finally arriving at its correct answer. I signed the documents in Patricia's office with the same steadiness with which I had laid out the engineering drawings. And when I walked out into the November morning, I stood on the sidewalk for a moment and looked up at the sky, and I thought about 31 years, and I let myself feel the full weight of the loss of them. Then I got in my car and I drove. Carol was served that afternoon. Garrett was served an hour later. Ray, though he was not my wife, was not my son, was not my problem to legally dismantle, had his own situation developing courtesy of the documentation I had provided to the bank's fraud department and, at Patricia's suggestion, to the state attorney general's office. I did not watch any of it happen. I had done my part. I had built the structure. The rest was the work of institutions. What happened in the weeks that followed is, in some ways, not my story to tell in detail. The legal proceedings are ongoing, and Patricia has advised me to be careful about what I say publicly. What I can tell you is this. The transfers were reversed where they could be reversed. The property transactions that had not yet been completed were halted. The LLC was unwound. $240,000 remained protected in accounts that the bank had frozen at my request on the morning after Daniel Reeves first called me. Carol retained an attorney. We have not spoken directly since the morning the papers were served. I have thought about what I would say to her if I did, and I have not yet found the right words, and I have stopped trying to find them. There are some losses you do not make sense of. You simply carry them differently over time. Garrett, my son, the boy I coached in Little League, the boy I taught to drive in an empty parking lot on a Saturday morning, the boy I watched become a man retained his own attorney, and is cooperating with the investigation in exchange for certain considerations. I understand why he did it. I do not yet fully understand why he did any of it in the first place. That question is one I expect to carry for a long time. Denise filed for divorce 3 weeks after everything came out. I supported her decision. I told her that whatever happened between her and Garrett, she and my grandchildren would always have a grandfather, and that was not contingent on the legal status of her marriage to my son. She cried when I said that. I probably did too, though I'm a man of a certain age and generation, and I'll leave that detail where it is. I see the children every other Sunday now. We have a new routine. I pick them up from Denise's apartment, and we go to the park if the weather holds, or to the science museum when it doesn't. My granddaughter likes the geology exhibits. My grandson likes the space section. I like watching them discover things. About 2 months after everything was filed, I painted the living room. It sounds like a small thing. It was not a small thing. Carol had chosen the color a particular shade of green that I had never loved but had lived with because she loved it. I painted it a warm gray, and when I was done, I stood in the middle of the room in paint-spattered clothes, and I looked at the walls and I thought, this is my house now, built by my hands, by my years, by my work, mine. I replaced the furniture in the bedroom. I bought a new coffee maker. I refilled the bird feeder. I have been asked, by the few people I have told this story to, whether I am angry. It is a reasonable question. I have thought about how to answer it honestly. What I feel is not the sharp, burning anger of betrayal newly discovered. That feeling came and went in those early days, in the car, on those long walks through the autumn neighborhood, in the quiet kitchen in the evenings when I was performing normalcy while holding all of this inside me. What I feel now is something more like clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when something you had built your life around turns out to have been constructed on a flawed foundation, and you have to go back to the beginning and assess honestly which parts were real and which parts were not. Some of the 31 years were real. I am certain of that. The early years, the lean years, the years of raising our son, those were real. The love was real, or it was something I believed was real, which at the time amounted to the same thing. But people change, and not always in the direction of more love. And sometimes a person you trusted completely makes choices you cannot reconcile with the person you believed them to be. I do not have a clean resolution for that. I don't think most people do. What I have is my house, and the gray walls, and the bird feeder outside the kitchen window. I have Sunday afternoons at the Science Museum with 2 children who look like my son and eat too much popcorn and argue over the remote in my car. I have Patricia, who is now handling the remainder of the proceedings with the quiet efficiency of someone who has seen this before and knows how it ends. I have Earl, who occasionally emails me updates on the financial recovery with the same dry precision he brings to everything. I have Frank, who sent me a brief text after the papers were filed that said only, "Good work, Walter." And I have this, the knowledge that when the ground shifted under me, I did not panic. I did not confront without evidence. I did not act out of rage or wound or the blinding need to make someone feel what I was feeling. I built the case. I protected what was mine. I took care of the people who needed taking care of. That is not nothing. At 63 years old, after 31 years, in the gray-walled house with the coffee maker that brews exactly the way I like it, that is not nothing at all. Daniel Reeves, the bank manager who called me on a Tuesday morning and wrestled for 3 days with whether to say anything, I sent him a handwritten letter. I don't know if that is unusual. I expect it is. I told him that what he did took integrity, and that integrity is rarer than most people admit, and that I was grateful for it. He wrote back a short note, professional but genuine. He said he was glad things had worked out. I keep his note in the top drawer of my desk. Some mornings I make my coffee and stand at the kitchen window and watch the birds at the feeder, and I think about all of it, the years, the loss, the long, quiet work of those 2 weeks, the folder I handed to Patricia on that November morning. I think about what it means to build something carefully and then have it come apart, and whether the building was still worth doing. I think it was. I think the careful building is always worth doing, even when what you're building turns out to be different from what you intended. I am 63 years old. The light comes through the kitchen window in the morning, and it lands on the counter exactly the way it always has, because the window doesn't know anything has changed. The birds eat. The coffee brews. I start the day.